Vince, wonderful to have you here. You're going to talk to us today all about, I guess, pitching to various kinds of investors, what that looks like, and some of the implications there. So Vince, over to you. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I shall take it away then. So let's just make sure this is all set up. Did that just change? Cool. All right. Yeah. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Not to spend too long on this, but just to sort of tell people who don't know me already, where some of these ideas come from. So I've been in the video games industry since the first half of the 90s. So I'm over 30 years in now. And I've done lots of different things over that time. So I sort of started on a creative ticket, if you will. So I did everything from sort of level design through design up to creative director. And then I did the production track as well. So I did everything from producer up to sort of executive producer and development director. And I did that both on the publishing side and on the development side. So sometimes I was the guy pitching projects, pitching games. Sometimes I was the guy and my group that was being pitched to. And that was over about a 20-year period. I did that sort of going forward and back. So I got a good kind of taste of both sides of the table at a project level. And then I'd been, as a 20-year vet, I guess you'd call it at that point. So for the next decade after that, I basically was part of a C-suite. So I was either a CEO or a COO. Probably the one that people are most familiar with is Bossa, where I was the CFO for 6.5 years. We had some success there. And then that led me into, bizarrely, private equity. So I was the COO of a private equity fund for a couple of years, which, for those who don't know, basically we come in, we would buy companies and we would help scale them up. So I got my first taste of sort of being pitched at the company level rather than the project level, because people would want to sell us their companies. So I was involved in that. And then I left and I decided to sort of go independent. And I started angel investing because I'd sort of got the taste of it through private equity. And one of the companies I started working with, which is Good Gate Media, as I was initially an advisor for those guys, it just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's kind of one of the main things I do now. And we're spread over film, TV, and games. We had a couple of film releases out recently that are going down quite well, a couple of things in production for TV, and a handful, well, 3 games that are in production as well on that side. So I do that. So I'm making stuff. So that's when I'm using my sort of pitching thing brain, if you will. I'm a member of the Games Angels. So I think I've done 8 investments now through those guys. So that's when I'm being pitched to. So I get quite a lot of kind of companies pitching me their wares through that. I'm also a mentor for Creative UK. So I don't even know, I've done maybe 15 companies through those guys. I basically work with the founders and the CEOs to help them scale their companies, get them pitch ready, get them ready for investment, that side of things. And just because, as I say these days, that's all a bit of a weird shape professionally. I now sort of have VC companies reaching out to me. Like typically they'll want to kind of talk to me about what's all this video game business about, how do we get in, or we're already kind of in, but we've got some projects, could you take a look at it? So I basically get to see it from multiple sides of the table. So that's where all these thoughts and experiences come from. So I want to talk a little bit about the deck, right? So most of these kind of pitches revolve around a deck. Now, what I say quite a lot is it's not actually about the deck, right? The deck is actually a useful tool, right? It's an asset. But what's great about a deck is really since, for the last 25 years, say, since the kind of internet exploded, pitch decks have become a thing, right? There was slightly longer form before that time. So what that means is for 25 years, people have been thinking about what's the right things to say, what's the right order to say them, and how to say them to let somebody quickly understand what you're proposing. So the deck is important in so much as they've worked out the right things to talk about. So what I like with deck work and working on decks is it helps you work on your company and understand your company, what you're doing with your company and how you want to communicate it. Likewise with your project, I do a lot of work with companies getting the deck right, but that really means getting the understanding the company and communicating what the company does right. So even though you've got a deck, that just means you're better at talking about it, whether it be to your own people or whether it be to external people. So I think spending time on that is important, even if it feels like not the most important thing you're doing. I think the ability to communicate your business is in fact super important. So with decks, and I appreciate this. This may be preaching to the choir in some cases, but I will repeat it because it's worth kind of thinking about. Is there are certain forms of kind of developed which make it easier to kind of think about how you're going to convince somebody else of something, which in this case is probably giving them money. Uh, which is what is the problem you're solving with your business, with your product. I sort of use that word interchangeably with opportunity, because it isn't strictly a problem, right? It just could be an opportunity, right? The opportunity could be there's this big gap and nobody's realized that, right? So it's opportunity or problem version would be is, I don't know, like RTS games sell loads but no one seems to be making them. Like, there's a problem, there isn't enough in the market, we're going to make more, we're going to sell it. um, and then you're trying to convince that person that once you've kind of identified this problem or this opportunity, that you've got a great solution to it, right? If there's not enough RTS games, your solution is we're going to make RTS games. That seems pretty clear cut. And then the final bit is the really arguably the most important bit, and the bit that people really need to over-index on, which is you want to be able to convince the person on the other side of the table that there's nobody on the planet who's better equipped to do the thing you just told them about, right? To basically build that RTS game. So you want the problem, not enough RTS games. The solution is we're going to make a great RTS game for all these reasons, and we are the guys that basically are the ones to kind of do that. Now, you'd be surprised how often it fails on that last bit. So one of the things that Leo asked me before this was to maybe kind of point at some mistakes that people make, and that's a classic mistake. You'll see this all the time. It's like guys that made car game pitching you for making RTS game. And it's like I get it. I get maybe you got bored making the car game, but a better pitch is we're the that car game you've heard of that did really well. We're the guys that made that card game, and we're going to make a new card game. And it's going to be even better because we've got most of the team and we've got some funky ideas. We didn't do that. So again, it's aligning your experience with what you're pitching is, I would say, one of those things that can be typically misaligned sometimes. Sometimes is probably a better word for that. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the different places you might be going to convince people of something, again, usually to give you money. So I think the one that most people are kind of familiar with is the publishing side of things. So we'll start with that. But before we get there, the point I'm trying to make here, again, taking it from Leo's angle of like, where do people maybe trip up or what are the traps, is effectively not knowing your audience well enough and not shaping your pitch appropriately to that audience. So let's go through it. So for example, publishers, I think, which is the one that most people are most familiar with, what they are doing is project investment, effectively, right? They are investing in projects. So that's what they care about, right? They care about the game. And they obviously care about the team, and then they care about the company, but kind of in that order, right? Like, you're not going to have an amazing company with a game they don't care about and end up getting the game signed, right? So it's all about the game. And I would say the biggest mistake I see in all of the other things we're going to talk about is that people do it as if they were talking to a publisher rather than these people who aren't publishers. So again, everything I said before about alignment, like aligning what you're pitching with what you've done before is going to make it easier to pitch into that environment, because it is a bit of a red ocean out there at the moment. So we'll talk about that a bit later. Do your homework as well, right? Know who you're talking to, like on an individual level via LinkedIn, and what does that publisher do? If you're pitching your driving game to the guys that do adventure games, and that's probably less likely to land. So again, just know your audience in that sense. So now maybe the one that is maybe potentially less familiar to other people, which is angels and VCs. So let's start with VCs. So again, the classic thing I see decks as an investor. I will see decks that are clearly more like a publishing deck more than a company deck, and that's the important thing. Is typically, if you're an investor, a VC or an angel, you will be investing in the company, right? So it's reordering how you're pitching things, which is basically you're pitching the company. Again, all the things we said about ordering, about what problem you're solving, all that sort of stuff, but it's the company, then it's the team, then it's the project. It's like, here's a great company, here's the right people to be running it, and by the way, here's our first project. Again, classic mistakes is you're pitching to a VC or an angel, and you're spending ages talking about mechanics within the game, right? You only need a light touch on stuff. You're basically trying to convince them that this is a a company worth investing in for the long term. Okay. And by long term, I mean a few years, not 20, right? Like typically returns are sort of a 5-year window, something like that, if you're talking to VCs. Now, what you need to understand about VCs, again, about know your audience, is, I say, and I know many, and I like these guys, but they're not like us. Right? They see the world differently, think about the world differently, and you need to understand that. Otherwise, you're not going to make any traction because you're going to be speaking a different language, right? So, and this is the bit that I think surprises people the most, which is how much a VC expects to get back from their investment, right? Which is, and the thing I'm going to tell you about is even worse than what they say, right? So what a VC will say is we're looking for 10x returns, right? And quite often as a developer, you'll be thinking, well, that can't be right. That doesn't make any sense. 10x, you put £1,000,000 in, you expect to get 10 million back. It's like, yeah, they really do. And with a relatively short amount of time frame. And the reality is there's loads of perfectly good games companies that won't necessarily be able to make those returns, right? So you've got to think very carefully, are you the type of company that can get the type of massive growth that can give those type of massive returns? And here's where it's even worse, right? Because they'll say 10x, but what that really means is it's not even worth talking to you if you can't convince us it's 10x. But actually, we're hoping it's a lot more than 10x, because the thing that no one talks about is a load of those investments go straight down the drain. So the ones that do succeed have to make all the money back for the ones that don't succeed. Okay. The other thing you need to understand about those guys is they've gone out and got investment themselves, right? They built these funds, so they're responsible for other people's money. So, they're going to be pretty pushy about getting those returns back. So again, if everyone's playing nice and everyone knows this is the setup, that's absolutely fine. And the other thing to understand again, which is a little bit touching on the thing I mentioned before, is like, VCs think in terms of their portfolio, right? They care about the success of the overall portfolio. And the overall portfolio is only successful if they have these outsized returns from the minority of companies that go really big and successful. They basically have no interest in your company doing kind of all right. It's like you're going to take over the world or die trying. So what that means is if you take that VC money, they're going to push you to be the biggest, largest, most successful version of your company that's imaginable, or explode the company in trying. Now, from a portfolio perspective, they don't mind if 7 other companies don't work and 3 of them do. But you care if you're the one company that's one of the 7 that went down because you overextended yourself. That's important to you. So again, knowing your audience, again, if you think that sounds good, you want to go over and take the world, and you quite like the idea of being pushed, and it's all or nothing, VC money is pretty good, right? But if it's not what you want, then maybe that's not the right place for you. Angel investors, what do angel investors care about? So they're a bit different, right? So for a start, angel investors haven't taken anybody else's money, so they haven't got this like extreme pressure to make sure the fund returns from other people breaking their backs. It's individuals who are using their own money, so they are not like beholden to anybody else. So in that regard, there's a bit less pressure. In another regard, it's their own money, so there's a bit more pressure. But what I find, certainly in the circles I move within, is angels normally are more aligned with the thing you're doing. They typically come from roughly the same industry as you, and they kind of normally have other things. It's not just about the money. VCs are, it is about the money. It might be packaged with a green angle or a diversity angle or various other things, but ultimately, money is first and center. With angels, there are other things like, it could be wanting to give back, wanting to help, wanting to surround yourself with stuff that's interested you. No one's really doing it to lose money, right? But I think it's a bit of a softer audience. And the other thing is it comes in at an earlier stage. VCs are typically looking for, you've proved something is working, but if you throw more money at it, it will work even more. Sometimes I describe angel investment as decks and dreams, right? Because basically you're really taking a big punt. But again, what people don't really talk about that much is because you're secretly hoping that you're going to make even bigger returns than the VCs because you came in earlier. So again, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for these outsized returns. But irrespective of that, I would say, angels are typically a softer audience. It's quite common that angels have a bit of experience in these stages that will be coming later. So angels can be quite useful for helping you understand the VCs and kind of introducing you to the VCs and stuff like that. So again, you know, when you're talking to VCs, you really are just trying to prove that you're going to take over the world and this is going to be massive and everyone's going to make a gazillion dollars and here's how. When you're talking to angels, it's a bit softer than that. You do have to convince them the business model works because they do care about money. But there's loads of other potential purposes. Like, I love driving games. You guys are making driving games. I always want to work in driving. You know, you'll have other things that can kind of bring them in. And then we shouldn't forget, you know, some of the other things like grants, for example, right? So one of the first things I talk about when I talk with companies early on in our sort of the mentorship stuff I do is, you know, how good is your grant game? Like, having a great grant game can be transformative. If you're a small team that's making something for a few hundred thousand, for example, you could potentially get it all done on grants, right? And that means you don't have to dilute your company, you don't have to give equity. It's effectively free money, although they make you work for it, right? For anyone who's had to fill in those grant forms. And it's highly contested, of course. I mean, everybody wants to kind of get grant money because it's you know, free money is everyone's favorite money, right? But I wouldn't say it's particularly less contested than, say, going to angels or going to VCs, right? So know your grant game, look into grants. You can do a lot, especially early on with that. Um, if you're not familiar with the names, you've got the UK Games Fund, there's Innovate, there's BFI, Google's your friend, you can find some others as well. And what I'd say with the grant side of things as well is be prepared to sort of, you know, go left a bit, right a bit with your ideas, right? Sometimes there's not an immediate alignment with a grant fund, but potentially, you know, you can slightly change your direction on a project, for example, to align with it. If you whatever you've got a game that is currently got nothing to do with saving the planet, but you could just as easily make it about saving the planet. Then maybe you align with some fund that's particularly interested in promoting saving the planet, for example. So have some flexibility there. And then finally, you know, debt, right? You know, you can go out and get debt, right? So again, knowing that audience, it's, you know, they care about slightly different things. It's lots of the things we've been discussing are kind of less important to those guys. It's they just want to see security. They want to know it's a safe bet for them to get repaid. You'll probably have to put some kind of personal risk on that. You have to risk something that's probably important to you to get that debt. But in terms of returns, I mean, it's just a different universe. They're the normal sort of percentages one sees in the real world, not these kind of crazy returns that people who invest in a company want to get. Okay. So less is more. So again, on the what do people get wrong or what should we get right, depending on whether you're a more positive or negatively spinning person. One of the things that I end up spending a lot of time working with teams with is making their pitch simpler, right? This may even be the number one mistake, is like it's just too complicated. There's too many ideas, there's too many words, it's too dense. Lots of times someone will start, I'll just say, you know, and I'll let them talk to start with, give me the pitch, right? And it might be a deck or it might be verbal. And 10 minutes later, they're still talking, right? And maybe a minute in, I was going, oh, this is quite interesting. But by 10 minutes in, I'm like, I can't even remember what the thing was you said first. So we'll spend a lot of time just like simplifying, simplifying, simplifying. Um, and the reason why is because people like me read 100 of these things, like like you know, they're all coming in. So you need to get to the point really quick. You need to get it really distilled and get it really clear. So I work with companies like week in, week out. We work on the deck, we work on the company, we unpack everything. And there's always this magic moment that happens where you finally get it. You finally summarize your game or your company really simply and elegantly with just a minimal amount of words, and you look at it and it's like eureka. And what I say is the reason you know you've got to that moment is because it looks like you just wrote it this morning. It just looks like, well, obviously, how else would you say it? Duh. It's like it's such a simple thing. I can't even imagine how else you could have ever possibly said that. And that's when you know you've got it, right? It's really simple. It's low word count. It's pop, 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 pop. You can in like 30 seconds, someone gets it. In 3 minutes, they really, really get it. And any more time is just gravy. So less is more. Try and simplify your ideas. Lots of creative people have lots of ideas. There may be 10 things in your game that's amazing, right? That's too many because by the time you've got to the end of that list, I've forgotten the early ones and I don't know what the priority is. You need to pick a small amount and over index on those, because if someone's interested and they're hooked, they'll always come back for more later when they've got more brain space. But when you have a limited window at the start of the process, keep it very, very simple. You know, this is the opportunity. Here's exactly what we're doing and here's why we're the right people to do it, and look at a shiny thing. That's another mistake people make, like thinking it makes sense to hold stuff back because I don't know why we think that, but you've got to show everything good as soon as possible because people are looking at a lot of stuff and they're basically looking for reasons to say no. Okay. Right, here's the final bit with a good pitch, which is you've sort of worked on your deck, which again I'll repeat, is just a proxy for thinking about your product or thinking about your company. It's just a way of thinking about the right things and getting it ordered, and it just ends up being an asset once you've done that work. And you've done your problem, you've done your solution, you've done. There's no one on the planet more appropriate for this. And by the way, there's a whole thing that I could talk about how to answer that last bit because it may well be that you personally don't currently look like the best person on the planet to do it. But that's where people like mentors and advisors and other people that you can surround yourself with, which is the team overall on net, looks like the guys that can do it. Then what you want to try and do, and this is like a stretch goal, it's not always possible, but the best people do it, which is above and beyond all of that, you're effectively telling an interesting story about yourself as an individual, as a group, that's kind of got a personal aspect for it. And the person on the other side of the table realizes that you're on an interesting journey, you're partway through this journey, and they want to join you on this journey. Now, ultimately, we're game makers, which is just an interactive version of storytellers. So we should be good at this stuff. We should be good at making a compelling pitch, which is interesting, and people want to come for an adventure with us. So remember that. Again, that's the cherry on the cake if you can get that right. Okay, we touched on this a little bit before, which is kind of, like doing your homework. So here's the thing, like, the last thing you want to do is be in a meeting with someone and them say, well, what do you know about me? Or what do you know about us? Right? Like, surprisingly high amounts of people don't actually know that much. Like, all you got to do, I've done this so many times, you've only got to spend 10 minutes on the internet and you can look like an expert. If you got half an hour, you look like a genius, right? Just, who am I meeting with? Look them up on LinkedIn. What have they done? Oh, I played that game once. Like, that's a great talking point. Do your homework, understand who you're dealing with, what they care about, where they come from. From the publishing side, for example, I've had, this is a long time ago, but like, some developers horrifically misread, oh, you're a publisher, so I know exactly what you are. They didn't know me. I'd come straight from development, and they were constantly referencing a game that I'd made when they were telling me about their project, but they hadn't realized I was involved with it, and I didn't feel the need to tell them. But that would have been an easy way to get me on side, right? So that sort of things, and homework can mean a bunch of different things, right? So it can mean numbers as well. It can mean the market. You need to know about the market you're going into. It's not just about making a great game. There's loads of great games that don't succeed, and there's loads of average games that can take over the world, and it's often to do with other things, right? They have to get past a certain quality threshold to even be in the game, but then it's like, is there actually a market for this? Are there people waiting for this? Are there enough of these people who are prepared to pay for this? Have we clearly communicated to them that this is the thing that they want to buy? Understanding all of that sort of stuff as part of your pitch is becoming increasingly important. One of the realities I'm seeing, particularly on the publishing side, is a sort of shift in, how can I put this? A shift in responsibilities. Okay, it used to be pretty simple. Developers made the game, publishers sold the game, right? And both considered themselves experts in their fields. And there was a little bit of a Venn diagram where the publisher would help the developer make the right game that was selling, would sell well because they understood the market. So they might get involved in development with that goal in mind. Increasingly, I'm seeing things that we're always publishing moved on to development. So you're going, so the obvious one is more and more funding emphasis going on the side of the developer. Like, it's, now you've got publishers that won't give you any development funding, for example. That didn't used to be a thing. That was like one of the main things they did, right? But times have changed, right? So the emphasis for funding more of your development is moving on to development. But I'm also seeing it in terms of like messaging, right? You'll have to explain how you would message it, like classic marketing stuff, where before you wouldn't have to do that. You'd say, we've got this amazing game, and someone would, the publisher would excitedly work out how to talk about it. Now, increasingly, what you have to do is you have to sort of make it very obvious immediately for the publisher how they would sell it. So you as a game maker have to be thinking as a marketeer, basically making it immediately apparent exactly how the publisher would sell it to the players. And there's more and more examples I could come up with, but times are changing. So as someone selling to a publisher, you have to do more and more of things that were traditionally on their side to even get those deals. And again, there's a whole conversation about what do those deals even look like these days. Again, do your homework, understand who you're up against, understand the fact that they're expecting more from you. That's the reality of the world. Okay, what's up next? Yeah, this is the reality that I'm pretty sure everyone will realize. It really is a red ocean out there, right? You know, everyone is making games these days, right? And things that sort of used to work are working less, right? So sort of thing. So you might be an indie team necessarily. So you're an indie team making something, I don't know, for £1 million or £500,000 or whatever, and your whole selling point is like, but you're making something really high quality, and the AA guys are having to spend 10 million quid and stuff like that. So you sort of saw yourself as, if you are an indie, against these guys that are spending more money, and that was your edge. Now the reality is now increasingly there's just two dudes in a room who are making something as good as what you're doing for a packet of Walkers and a toffee crisp, right? So now you really are up against an absolute red ocean of competition. So thinking about all of this stuff, the stuff that we've talked about so far and the stuff we'll talk about next, is unfortunately super, super important. It's not good enough to have a great game. It's to have loads of people have great games. It's all this other place. It's like, and it's marketable, and it's looking for, and it's aligned with an audience, and we've thought about this, and we've got the right team for it, and we've got advisors who've done this, and all that other sort of stuff. So you have to accept that it is a red ocean out there. That's the reality. Okay. Right. So here's a kind of recap, a little bit on something I said earlier, but to go a bit deeper. So something I see a lot of in lots of different places is people sort of leaning into their disadvantage, if you will, right? So leaning into advantage is about like all of us have certain things we do well and certain things that are on our track record and certain things that sound really good, right? And then there's other things that we haven't done yet, or we might not be good at. And it's a pretty simple idea. You want to be leaning into the things that clearly you've demonstrated you're good at, because that's your advantage. And again, as we mentioned before, the driving team forming a new company to make driving games for the driving market, having proven it and taken half the team with them and adding a few more people from other really good driving teams is a great example of leaning into advantage. They're leaning into the advantages they have, which is a reputation for making driving games. The alternative, again, would be making platform games, whatever it happens to be. And again, this is surprisingly prevalent. Is like a team that did all this great thing, pitching something that's different from all the stuff they've done in the past. There's plenty of people that do the opposite, but a surprising amount of people that do that. And I think it comes from, they could never really do the thing they wanted to do, or they've always wanted to try their hand at this, which is fine when you're using your own money, fill your boots. But if you go into other people and you're expecting their money, they don't want to expend your, like pay for you to learn something new, right? What they want to do is pay for you to do the thing that you've proven you can do before. So again, if you're trying to shape yourself for success, stack the deck in your favor. You want to be very clear. We make driving games. There's an opportunity in driving games. We're the guys that made the best driving games you've ever heard of. You should give us money to make a driving game. That's what leaning into your advantage looks like. Okay, this is potentially subjective, and it's born of having seen hundreds, if not thousands, of pitches. Stand out, be different. Just this, I mean, I'm sorry if I hurt anyone's feelings, but if you're another AAA team that got made redundant and is going to make the best indie studio, I'm like, yeah, you and everyone else, mate. Tell me something that's different. Tell me something that's interesting. What's the other thing that you've got, right? Standing out, doing something different, is high risk, arguably, right? Standing out from the crowd is always risky, but I would say, given that it's a red ocean, I think you need to do something to delineate yourself from the crowd. And there's a million different ways you could be different, but coming up with something that yourself is going to make you stand out a bit, I think is important. Okay, right. So I want to talk about this one a little bit. So the last few years, as I moved from pure game stuff to kind of moving into investment stuff, and then through Good Gate Media, which is really the main thing I do these days, we're doing films and we're doing TV as well, right? So, and that's been a fascinating journey for me, right? I still wouldn't claim to be an expert in the film side. There's people around me who are. However, I know enough to know how different it is from games, and I think there's some lessons to be learned there. So, at Good Gate, for example, we're just 5 people. We're 5 people, right? But over the last 2 years, we've gone up to 500 people, right? But what we do is we spin up little SPVs, we do a film, we hire a bunch of people for it, and then it finishes, and then we get rid of them, and then we do a game, and we spin it up. And it's very, very normal for the film world to think like that. Those production companies doing those major films, there's not, if you look at the actual company, there's not a lot of people. There's just a handful of people there, but they just create these entities and spin them up for projects and go big, but they don't have that burden. The classic video game thing of, oh my God, the next project, how do we sign it? Like, we've got 100 people to support, which I've been through, which is completely normal for us in the video game industry. It's just completely abnormal in the film industry. No one's doing that. Like, unless you're Pixar, no one's really doing that, right? That's not how it works. So there's this kind of comfortableness with massive scalability up and down depending on the project. We're up like 100 people for 6 months, and then we're down again to 2 people, then whatever happens to be, which I think our industry can learn something from. Interestingly, working as one of the leadership team at Goodgate, originally as an advisor, I don't think they didn't even realize they were doing anything particularly special because they came from film that was normal for them. It took me to say, you do know that most companies don't really work like that. Most people, they just kind of grow incrementally and get bigger and bigger, and everyone's on salary and an employee. So yeah, so I think that's worth observing. The other thing I sort of have learned from the film side of things and the film model is just the level of persistence. We don't really see anything like this in video games, right? It is absolutely common, stroke normal, for it to take something like 10 years to make a film. It takes forever. It might take 2 years just to get the script right, and then 2 years to get somebody remotely famous interested in it. But they don't give up. They're persistent. If they believe in it, it's like year after year after year. And there's so many films that you'll see and be familiar with and famous and did well, that if you look into it, you'll find out it was like 12 years to get it into production, right? Because we don't see anything. Like, we give up pretty quick in the games industry. Now, in part, that's because of rotating technologies. And in part, it's because something that's really positive about the games industry is that we can test things early and get KPIs and not lie to ourselves. But when it's not that the KPIs are telling you this is a terrible idea, it's just the publisher didn't bite. After 6 months, you go and get a job. I think that's where we can learn something from the film industry, because they're just relentless. They do not give up year after year after year, right? The other thing that we can learn from the film side of things, and this is just nuts, right? This whole area is how they fund things. It's like the model of funding in video games is so simple compared to film. It's like, basically in games, you go, well, I need some money, so I'll go to the publisher and they give me the money. That worked out. Or they didn't give me the money and go, oh, I guess I'm not making the game then. That's kind of our level of complexity. Again, in line with their persistence, they will, by hook or by crook, get it funded. And honestly, it's a Byzantine Rubik onion of complexity as to how they get these things funded. It might have many different funding sources, many different models. They've got these waterfall things, and they've got loads of people. Like, if you've ever wondered why there's loads of EPs, it's because everyone touched it and moved it and provided a bit of money here. So again, it's too short a session to go into it here. But again, if you want to look about how other industries have kind of managed to solve their funding problems, you could do worse and have a look at how some of those funding models work in the film industry. So, Showtime. Right. So the reality of getting money out of anybody, and everything I said before is true, and then this is kind of true as well, which is ultimately that you're generally investing in a person, right? It's a person wrapped in a company, wrapped in a project, right? Wrapped in a team, whatever it is. But if you're leading a company, if you're the leader, whatever you've called yourself in that role, ultimately, if you're getting money out of someone, it's probably because they believe in you. So, like it or not, and some people are this, some people aren't this, some people pretend to be this, some people get better at this, is you have to be a bit of a showman or a show lady, if that's a word. You have to be out there, you have to be likable, you have to be convincingly competent, you have to be creating an impression that you can go out and change the world, and you can be trusted to do that, right? So a bit of showmanship is important. And again, not everyone is that person, but that ability of, I've seen it absolutely again and again and again. A charismatic leader is transformative to the ability to bring money into the company. Two different people with identical companies or identical products, and one of them's the showman and one of them's not. We all know where the money's going. So again, that's part of the job. And if it's not you, you can become it, you can learn it. And if that's still not you, then maybe someone else needs to be out front selling the project or selling the company. Okay, so we're getting to the end of me talking. So, video games business, I've been saying this for a long, long time. I said, we're in the video games business. There's literally only two words in that, and one of them is business, right? So that's 50%. So it's a kind of a parting comment, but it's like, it's really, really important that even though we do something we love and we're creators and we make games and all the wonderful things I could say about that, it is fundamentally a business, right? No one's going to pay you money to do your hobby. No one's going to pay money to do your dream project unless you can prove it's a business. And again, when it comes to the sort of people that I invest in and the people that I know invest in, it's not just that they're great creatives, it's that they're business people, right? They're business people who are, and it could be separate. You could have the creative one and the business one. That's okay, but you absolutely need to understand that these people understand it's a business. They understand all those crazy terms to do with making businesses work correctly. Um, and that's ultimately what they're going to be investing in at the company level. They're going to be investing in a competent, charismatic leader who can go out and change the world, understand the business as well as the creative aspects required to do well in what is ultimately the video game business, not the baked bean business. So that, and then that's just over halfway, which was my plan. So it's open to questions now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Vince. That was a really interesting deep dive into all things sort of investment and pitching there. I wonder if you could sort of before we well, if anyone has any questions, please do pop them in the chat. We do have a couple in there, but to get things sort of moving, I wondered if you could sort of comment on the sort of environments within which um, we can make these opportunities for ourselves. So is it a case of getting to certain shows? Is it a case of going to certain events, or um, is it cold emails? What's the best sort of way to gain some traction and
Yeah,
to
well,
make
what,
those opportunities?
there's a one word answer to that, and then I'll expand it, which is networking, right? Like you cannot underestimate how important that is. Now, that's one of the things I end up talking a lot about with a lot of companies. How good your grant game, how good your networking game, right? And what you'll typically hear for people who aren't great at networking is, well, we went to that show and it cost us £1,000, but we didn't really get any business out of it. I hear that all the time, and it's like that's just not the way to think about it. It's much more of a downstream effect. What you've got to do is you've got to make yourself part of the conversation, because you're always there and you're always interesting and you're always helpful and you're always likable and you're always sort of dropping in about your project and stuff, but not heavy selling and getting into all the right places at the right time. The reality is you do sometimes cold call through to a deal, but more often than not, there's some kind of relationship that pre-exists, right? So it's someone knows that person, or you know them personally before, or you worked in a previous company with them before, and you can massively, massively stack the deck in your favor of that being true by just being out there, being at events, talking to people, being helpful, joining panels, talking about the things. I'm doing it right now, right? I'm on this, I'm talking about my stuff. I've name dropped some things that I do. I do it because I want to help Ukie and I want to give back. But I'm also well aware that the more I'm out there and the more I'm talking, the more chance that something interesting I never planned in advance is going to happen.
Absolutely. I think as well it's worth saying that with the networking, things change gradually over time anyway. So
Mm.
some of those connections that you might be making in year one might come to fruition in year three, kind of thing. So and people's
Absolutely,
roles change.
100%. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we've got a question in the chat here about solo devs. So thinking about back through the advice that you've been or suggesting here, from a sort of solo devs perspective, I'm assuming probably angels sort of make a little bit more sense, although possibly a publisher, an indie publisher, in terms of where to focus your attention.
Yeah, I think, yeah, good question. I think indie publishers, because like, here's the thing, when we talk about this, is like budgets are going down, right? Like there's some very, very high profile successful publishers that I know love one or two dudes in a bedroom just working on it in their spare time because the budgets are so low, right? We've gone from indies could be asking for a couple of million to there's someone somewhere doing it for a couple of 100,000 now. So I actually think, ironically, it's probably one of the best times if you are a solo developer going to the right publishers who are now way more open to that sort of thing than they were before, because they're all struggling, if we're honest. And the more they can lower that dev cost for their next punt, the better. Angels, yeah, I don't think I've ever seen it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. But it's a very high risk on an already high risk thing, right? It's like you're investing in a one person company basically. So I can't really imagine myself doing it. I don't think so. I think indie publishers, and there's certain ones I've got in mind, which I won't say, it's not my place to do. But I think would absolutely sign up a solo developer for the right project. In fact, they're doing it already. Multiple publishers.
That's really, really helpful. I think, anything to sort of narrow the sort of the approach is helpful there. So that's really,
Yeah,
really
it's
good.
just about getting the dev
Uh,
cost down. And a great way of getting the dev cost down is getting the headcount down. There's no lower than one. So
just let AI do it, huh? No, don't do that. So we've had another question in the chat. I don't know if you can pull it up because it's quite a long one with some background.
okay, let me. I can
But
probably do that. I didn't want to be distracted earlier. So okay,
that's
where
all
am
right.
I
That's
going
all
in the
right.
chat?
Up to Yana. So Yana is a UX strategist,
Okay.
helping tech startups and game dev founders to validate their ideas. They're asking from an angel investor's perspective, what format and amount of user research is actually sort of convincing? Do you prefer those story-driven decks, or um, you know,
Well, this is a
I
sort of the do
suppose.
your homework thing, right? Because what no one's an expert in everything, but if you're pitching something, you have to be an expert in the thing that you're pitching. Like again, the worst thing you can possibly do is pitch something, and you're supposed to be the expert at cozy games, and you're pitching your cozy game, and you make some assertion, and it just so happens that someone in the room knows more than you and can disprove your assertion. That's the worst, right? So whatever it is you're pitching, you have to have done your homework, right? It's yeah, again, if we're looking at cozy games just as a random example, in your deck you would have to have some understanding of the cozy game market, how much its value is, right? How much of it you think you can get, right? Like there's again, you can find all this stuff on the internet when you look at the different kind of scales of market. Like you obviously, if you're making a cozy game, you're not going to try and convince someone that you're going to capture the entire games industry's value, but you'll have some way of understanding that cozy is a percentage of the overall thing, and then my platform's a percentage of the cozy, and then I think, and then when you do those numbers, you go, oh, I've only got to get 1% of the cozy game market on the platform that I'm talking about for everybody to do gangbusters on the money. Or you might do your maths and go, actually, we've got to capture 25% of the market for everyone to make their money back and double it or quadruple it or 10x it, whatever it happens to be. There's no way I can convince anybody that I will get 25% of all the available global cozy dollars on my one game. So that's what I mean about homework. You have to do the maths, you have to understand the market, which bit's relevant to you, which bit of that you think you can get, how much money does that equate to, does it actually give the returns? So that's reasonably detailed. The whole thing could be wrapped in a story, but it's not story time without maths.
That's a very valid point. Thank you very much for looking at that one. So I guess we've got a sort of more of a comment in the chat here.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking back to the sort of the role of the publishers, now that they're asking for sort of polished prototypes of games with fully fledged communities in place and wish lists on Steam and that sort of thing. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that side of things at all. How can a business scale to that stage if their team is
Yeah, it's a bit chicken and egg, right? So my
yeah.
advice would try and make your projects as small as possible and cheap as possible, right? Like if you're going out asking for 5 million for your strategy game, good luck. You might get it. But what I'm seeing is a race to the bottom in terms of publishing funds. Numbers are getting lower and lower. you have to do your homework on how much they're going to spend on marketing and stuff like that, because I'm seeing those numbers smaller than I've seen historically. So again, I don't have a comprehensive outlook on what every single publishing deal is looking like at the moment. Um, but like I say, in the games industry, for most of the time, even things like VCs are a relatively novel new thing, right? We really just thought in terms of game publishers for a long, long time. You use some of your own money, you get it to a certain stage, the publisher pays for the rest of it and market it. And if you can't get that, then you give up and get a job, right? So again, just being a bit more complex in the thinking about how can I fund this, right? One of the things that's interesting that people typically don't do, but is worth exploring. Like typically, people aren't, putting their house up for collateral and taking some debt and using that to make their game, right? And I'm not suggesting people do that, but it's like, but why, right? It's you're trying to convince someone that this is definitely a good place to put your money. I stand by that, but then going, but obviously I wouldn't put my own money behind it. That'd be mad, right? And again, I'm not encouraging people to do that, but again, a bit of kind of lateral thinking around how can I get further. So some of the companies I work with and advise, and again, this is not particularly unique. This is pretty typical. And actually, I will explain this. I'm assuming people know this, but that might not be the case. Is you don't have to go out and get all the money at once, right? Like you can get small bits of money and increment up. So it's not unheard of, for example, stroke pretty common that a company might raise 150 grand, right? From angels. And there's a whole thing, by the way, if you don't know about SEIS and EIS, write it down and look it up. That makes a big difference to angel investors, right? So it's not unheard of that the first round will be 150 and that'll get them to a certain point. And then they'll raise 250 and that'll get them to another point. And then by 250, they've got a bit more. So it all looks a bit more attractive. So they can go to VCs at another point. So that's the other thing. Sort of with publishing deals, it's like it's sort of an all or nothing as far as I'm aware. I don't think it's particularly common that someone will give you part of the money and then say, well, wait and see and make a decision later, right? You're typically getting it or you're not getting it. But in investment, you can absolutely increment up the food chain. So at each stage, you're proving something more, and that could be a way to bypass this kind of hard wall or of until you've got everything, you've got nothing.
Fantastic. I wondered if you could just expand on the SEIS and EIS.
Yeah, sure. So these are
Yes,
these
yeah.
are
Sorry, I've been trying to look it up, but go
that's
for
the
it.
best way. That'll have the full detail. They're basically tax efficient schemes, right? If you're an investor, some of your money is protected. You can get tax relief on these things. So it's basically there are two different forms. SEIS is the very earliest one, which has more limitations, and then EIS is the slightly later stage one, which has slightly less limitations. But from an investment perspective, it basically just makes it simplistically much less risky and more financially attractive for people like me who might want to put their own money into something rather than someone who is not using those schemes. Again, it's all online, easily found.
Definitely. Thank you for that. That's really, really helpful. We've got one last question in the chat here, on project finance. So is project finance possible these days rather than equity? Asked by
Yeah, I
James.
mean, project finance is what publishers do. That's project
Yes,
finance, right? So we just call it publishing because we're in the video games industry. But if you're outside the video games industry, that would be recognized as project financing. So this is a weird one, right? Because I've got contradictory data on this. So my lot at Goodgate, we've been really good at going getting project financing from VCs. Now, I don't know anyone else who's managed to do that or is doing that. So, were it not from my personal experience, I'd say that doesn't really happen, right? Normally, VCs are investing in companies. Uh, so that's an unclear answer. Actually, I have got experience of specifically, we've gone out and got VCs to invest in our projects, and we have not had to give up equity in our company to do that. But outside of me and my little group, I don't know other people that have done that, right? So most other people are giving up equity in their company to get that VC investment. So that would be the normal thing. So
no, Well done.
Well, to be fair,
It's
that's what I talk
interesting,
about.
isn't
That's
it?
what I talk about coming from the film world, right? That's
Mm.
I'm from the games world, right? So I came up through the same thread as everybody else, and my mind has been opened by having the benefit of interacting from different people with different industries and seeing how they do things. And that's a classic example of by hook or by crook, they get their projects funded, right? And remember what I said earlier about sometimes a project is its own little micro company within the company. So it's a little bit grey there, right? But it's like they're effectively investing in that kind of vehicle that is housing that project, but it's not the holding company above it.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly interesting what we can learn from sort of other industries, I suppose. And yeah, the film model is it certainly does a job.
And I'm
Um,
still learning this
and
stuff, right? I'll sit there with John, who I work with, and he'll explain how the latest film we're working on is being funded, and my brain breaks. So I don't claim to be an expert on this stuff. I'm just lucky enough to have the dude next to me who knows this stuff. So it's been helpful for us, and all of that expertise is bleeding over into the game side. And my part is to know how to make games and all that side of things. And but I'm benefiting from this experience from this whole other industry that's managed to, by hook or crook, make these things, whereas we've always had a very simple model by comparison.
yeah, it's interesting. Fantastic. Well, I don't think there's any more questions in the chat. We should probably draw things to a close there, Vince. It's
Okay,
been really,
cool.
really fascinating having you talk on this topic. I think it's really, really, I mean, some crucial information there. And sorry, Harvey, I do apologise. Let's have a little look.
Yeah, I haven't caught up on all the text, to be honest. I was not reading everything
Yeah,
as it came through. So
that's okay.
I think someone asked a question about reaching out, email.
Yes,
Like
yes.
you can find me on LinkedIn. LinkedIn's the best way to do that initially. Just reach out on LinkedIn. I'm there. There's not too many people with my name, so I'm relatively easy to find.
Fantastic. I hope that answers your question, Harvey. So yeah, thank you so much, Vince. Really, really fascinating stuff. I think definitely keen to plug our funding formula next week on the 11th of November, Tuesday, taking place in London. Definitely worth looking at, and I'll pop that into the email later on. But yeah, thank you so much, Vince.
My
We
pleasure.
should call it a day. Thank you.